Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the creepiest thing you've ever seen a person do? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
When I was a senior in high school, I had a friend over to my house. We were hanging out in the basement. It was late, and I was ready to go to bed. I told my friend it was time to go. He said he would let himself out. I heard him walk upstairs, open the door, and shut the door, but I didn't hear the screen door shut, which means he didn't actually leave the house. I followed upstairs to investigate. The house was dark because everyone else was asleep. I turned on the living room light and found him kneeling on the floor next to the couch where my younger 12-year-old sister was sleeping. She had a bedroom that she shared with another sister, but preferred sleeping on the couch for some reason. I asked him what he was doing. He mumbled something that made no sense. I walked him out of the house to make sure he left, and broke off all contact with him after that. I later heard a rumor that he had molested his own younger sister. I was shopping in a women's clothing store a few years ago and noticed a guy a few feet away from me also browsing through the racks. At one point I noticed some weird motion from him in my peripheral vision and turned to see him methodically wiping his dick on each piece of clothing. I immediately contacted the manager and called 911, and now all purchased clothing gets washed immediately after I bring it home. No exceptions. I was going home after seeing my boyfriend at the time. It's late at night, roads are clear. I pull up to a stoplight on the edge of town. I'm talking in the rear view mirror, and I can see the city, but through the windshield there's nothing but cornfields. I see movement out of the corner of my eye, and I'm expecting a deer, but I realize I'm looking at a person hunched over, holding a crowbar, clearly trying not to be seen. I ran that red light and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't see it, but my college dorm roommate was showering in the common bathroom when he looked up and saw a phone recording him inside. He immediately opened the stall door, ran after the guy totally naked, and shouted at me, I was in our room, to come help. Turned out one of the dormers had been filming him a couple of times. The case reached the university tribunal that led to the creep's dismissal. I used to work at the courthouse many years ago. We still had our cases in printed form, like books. Anyway, this was a criminal court, so we had those folders with all the info about the case. This particular case was a murder case. 2 or 3 people murdered a guy in a small farm, dumped the body in a ditch. The corpse was found days later, so it was not only starting to rot, it had been found by vermin and small game. As a result, the body had no eyes, no lips, no ears, you can imagine. In Brazil, criminal cases like this are public accessible, so you could go to the courthouse and ask to see the case files. The particular day, one guy came and asked to see these files. He went straight for the forensic photos and just stared at the gruesome corpse for many minutes. Turns out it was his dad. We had to tell him we had to do something with the case files, or else he'd probably just stay there all morning. One time, a man followed me around the mall. He was quite sneaky about it and had not been paying attention. I may not have even noticed. He would wait on a bench outside of the stores until my 4th store I went into. He was inside as well, but made sure to stay across the room and catty-corner to where I was. He was on his phone the whole time, and my gut was screaming at me to not go out to my car alone. I exited that store and found a security guard to walk me out. On the way out of the mall, the guard told me I did the right thing because that man followed me until he saw me approach the guard. Don't know what his intentions were, but I am certain they were not good. Not me, but my mom. We used to live in an area with a lot of just empty road, like the kind where you can go 2 or 3 miles of no houses and just woods on both sides, and occasionally some farmland. My mom was coming home from a friend's house or something, and was driving through one of these empty areas. Legit, it has a bar and that's it. when she comes across a car that was sitting abandoned on the side of the road, still on the driver door open and keys in the ignition. Mom rolls down the windows and calls out to see if maybe someone is hurt or in the woods peeing. No response. So she keeps driving. When maybe a mile down the road, she sees another car backed into the woods and sees one of these bulky yellow flashlights sitting in the middle of the road with its beam pointing straight up and turned on. It gave my mom a bad feeling, so she sped around the flashlight and rushed home. I went on a singular date with a very mentally unstable person. He'd done a decent job of pretending to be somewhat normal leading up to the date, but throughout the few hours I spent with him, he slowly started to unravel. He started revealing to me about how he'd been arrested recently, got out of jail, how he hated his entire family. Then the real icing on the cake was me telling him I didn't really know how to make southern food because I wasn't from the South, to which he said, "You'll learn," very sternly. Then he asked if I was okay with sleeping on an air mattress with him because he wanted me to come over and cook for him. Nope, the away from that. Saw a woman sitting in a ditch next to the road around midnight in an all-white nightgown with long, dark, stringy hair. Looked almost exactly like the girl from The Grudge. She was reaching out toward the road yelling. It freaked me out because I'd never seen anything paranormal, but it felt paranormal. So I drove past her quickly. Then I started to feel bad, like maybe she was hurt or something. So I turned around and went back and asked her if she needed help. But she kept mumbling something about a cat. I figured she was just super high, so I decided to leave. But as I drove off, I could hear her yelling, "No, please come back." So I drove down to the nearest gas station and called the police. I don't know what happened after that, but it was definitely super creepy. I will say she wasn't covered in blood or bruises that I could see, and she didn't look hurt. She just looked strung out. I don't know if I did the right thing or not, but I did what I felt comfortable doing. Scene, not sure, but my ex-wife had stalkers. The story on one of them took the cake. Her fam had a summer home in Maine, in the middle of the woods overlooking the ocean. The back patio has huge glass windows and doors that has a full view of the ocean and the woods. It's really beautiful during the day. During the night, however, it was effing scary. It's dark and you couldn't see outside, but the outside could see you. So she told me one night she was home alone. She kept getting calls, this was the late 90s, telling her, "Whitney, I can see you." This creep would even describe what she was wearing and all that shit. She turned off the lights and ran upstairs with a knife. She still didn't figure out who he was. I've had a pretty lucky life. Worst I've seen is a 35-year-old man admitting he came to my church solely to ask my newly 18-year-old sister to be his girlfriend. He had already asked me, 29, but I was 18 when he asked. My sister, 31, 17 or so when he asked, and my other little sister, 21, 20 when he asked, and been rejected. He had known our family since my littlest sister was an infant. He told her she'd blossomed into a woman. He's the only person the pastor, my father, has told to leave our church and not come back.
Well, I know it's a place of worship, but behavior like that probably would warrant the reaction by your father. So, yeah, go find another church.
It got kind of creepy when we got to know that one of our neighbors was a murderer. He was a friendly man in public, actually. Not someone that you'd expect to be an ice-cold killer. We got to know about it when the police came and digged up the bodies in his yard. He usually took hookers from the city to the village, and then he strangled them. But he was, as a person, never creepy. Never anyone that you'd not trust or that you'd suspect of doing anything wrong at all. And that makes it even worse. Such people are around in society, and you don't see them as bad guys because you don't know what they're hiding. When I was 12, I packed my bags to go visit my dad for the weekend, and I was standing outside my gate waiting for my dad. Across from my apartment, there was a garage or fuel station, and then I saw this dude looking at me and walking straight toward me with a purpose. A car cut him off because he crossed the street, and I used that as my window to get back inside the main gate of the apartments. When he saw that I was back inside, he looked very disappointed and turned around and walked away. I don't know if that dude wanted to kidnap me or arm me, but as a kid, standing with a bag of clothes probably looked like I was planning to run away or something, and I assume he wanted to capitalize on that. He looked to be in his late 30s, and I was a 12-year-old boy. I could only assume the worst if that dude managed to grab me or something. When I was around 14, a woman about 50 to 60 years old, who was known throughout my neighborhood as being creepy, looking through windows, digging through trash, etc., approached my younger brother and I while we were walking home from a neighbor's house about a block away. She asked us if we wanted to come to her house at midnight for a laser tag party with her and her kids. Not all that odd except for her huge, forced smile, and the fact that this party was at midnight, which we had school the next day. Discovered a few weeks later that the kids she mentioned were the 5 to 6 children she adopted all at once. None of them were very well adjusted and were bullies to the other kids on the street. We also saw the kids being taken away in police cars, whatever that was about. I was in a dark, damp, dirty underground club, the way I preferred it, one night, and talking to my girlfriend at the time, and I felt a nudge on the can of Red Bull I was drinking. Out of the corner of my eye, and really quickly, I saw someone putting a bag of white substance away. After a good minute of pretending everything was normal, I walked to the promoter, gave him my can of drink, told him what happened and not to do anything until I was 10 minutes away, as I wasn't the physical type and didn't want to be privy to anything. I have no idea what happened. I never asked about it again. Maybe not the creepiest, but 2022, my brother and I were at a train station heading to New York. We had gotten there early and were just walking around. As we walked around, we saw a man standing by himself. He had a Shy Guy, the Mario character mascot, a bag next to him, and was standing perfectly still. He didn't move at all, not even to check his phone or look around. He stood there for some time and at some point just disappeared. Perhaps he was waiting for the train, but it was really weird, and we definitely thought he was up to something. Family friend's kid was off to the side by themselves rather than playing with all the other cousins. Not weird yet, as the kid was a bit odd in any situation. Look back a minute later to keep tabs on him. They had found a dead animal. They were hunched over the top of said animal and were pulling it apart, digging into its body with their fingers and slowly pulling internal bits and pieces out. They did this with an almost blank face, eyes curious and sharply focused. Then, as an adult walked over, they dug in and pulled a fist of organ guts out, smiled, and had this intense look as they held it out. Not sure where they are today. My dad agreed to pick up one of my friends from work. She was closing up the shop, so it was around 1 a.m. when we picked her up. On the way to her apartment was a railroad crossing. This particular crossing is notoriously uneven and rough. You have to slow down to a near stop to go over them. There's no street light, but these tracks either. As we slowed down to go over them, a man jumped out from the dip at the side of the track and grabbed our rear passenger door. Luckily, the car had automatic locks. My dad gunned it. Thankfully, we had taken my brother-in-law's SUV because his car was broken down. His car didn't lock. One specific night, me and my stepdad were walking my 2 dogs out for their last walk of the day. It was around 8 to 9 p.m., so it was already dark, and we were walking through a sketchy, long path with trees surrounding us, and everything was fine until my dog started barking and reaching very aggressive towards something, but we assumed it was a dog, since she's a very protective German Shepherd, until my stepdad slowly walked over to where she was barking, and he noticed this random middle-aged man doing some weird shit with black trash bags on the side of the path. And of course, my stepdad went up toward him and asked what he was doing, and he mysteriously answered, "Just waiting for the bus," in an eerie tone, while the bus stop was in the complete other direction from where he was. Since that, I've never walked there at night, even with someone by my side. As a freshman, my buddy and I would skip the bus and just walk home if it was nice out. We lived in the same little apartment complex, so everything was fine. Except sometimes he'd break off like a mile-ish away and go to his grandma's house. No big deal. Well, we would walk the sidewalk along the street until we hit an old railroad track. They turned into a walking path, and we'd jump on that pretty much from his grandma's house to where it let out around our apartment complex. One day, he broke off to his grandma's, and I kept walking home. When I'm maybe 200 yards from the opening of the paved walking path by my house, some crackhead comes out of the woods in a big trench coat and starts yelling at me. "You know who the guy I am?" and blah blah. At first I gave it no major thought, as I assumed he was just tweaking. But then he opened his coat and pulled out a machete and started chasing me. Thankfully he was tweaking pretty hard and didn't catch me. Ran into the Wendy's and called my stepdad and the cops, and we couldn't find the guy. When I was about 8 years old after school, I used to visit Grandma, who lived about 20 minutes walking away from my school. Because it was so close and I liked the road, I regularly walked the way to my grandma. First I had to walk through a small forest, then some not too crowded street full of condominiums, and lastly a cemetery. Directly after the cemetery was the street my grandma lived. One day after school, I think it might be around autumn or winter, when it got dark early, I decided to go visit my grandma because I wanted to watch some TV and was hoping for my favorite sweets, usually got me, after her big shopping day, once a week. So I started walking to her house. This day I had school until 15:30, basically daycare and after school for children with busy parents. So, through the cemetery, I noticed a man standing behind a tree, right next to the road ahead of me. He stared at me, but was kind of hiding behind the tree, even though the tree was way too small to cover him, so I could clearly see behind it. I never felt like that in my life before or after that moment. He looked scruffy, and his clothes were super dirty and destroyed, so I just walked toward him, and the moment I was basically next to the tree on the road, I started running. While doing so, I noticed that the man started running as well. He was chasing me, or so I thought. I only stopped running when I arrived at Grandma's house, screaming for help. My dad was at Grandma's place, and he immediately started searching with some friends. They searched the road, the cemetery, but there was no one. I still don't understand how he could disappear like that. Writing this gives me goosebumps.